What really defines a just leader? Is it about coming up with bold new ideas? Or is it something else entirely? Like a deep, unwavering commitment to a moral code that's already been established? Well, today, we're going to dive into the governance of the third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan. May Allah be pleased with him. His leadership was built on exactly that, a profound dedication to following the divine guidance already laid out.
So let's start with the mindset, right? Because before you get to any policies or declarations, it's all about the foundation. For Uthman, leadership began with a core understanding. It just wasn't a prize to be won, or some crown you get to wear. No, it was a solemn duty, a really heavy trust, a responsibility you take on not for glory here on earth, but because you know you're accountable to God.
Okay, so how did he actually put that philosophy into practice? We're going to break it down and look at 6 key areas. We'll start with his solemn promise, look at the unchanging foundation of his rule, then talk about this idea of shepherds, not money collectors. After that, we'll cover his guidance for the community, his belief in the right to account, and finally, the incredible legacy of principled rule he left behind.
All right, so the moment he takes the oath of allegiance, Uthman doesn't waste any time. He gets up right then and there, stands before everyone, and lays out his plan. He wanted to be crystal clear about the principles that were going to guide his every single move as their leader.
And his very first words, wow, they set the tone for his entire time as caliph. He basically says, I'm a follower, not an innovator. Think about that. He's saying, I'm here to follow the path that's already been laid out, not to invent my own. This was a huge promise of continuity, of stability, and of his own submission to a higher authority. So you gotta ask, right? What exactly was this foundation he promised to follow? He didn't leave anyone guessing. He was very specific. He laid out 3 clear, unshakable pillars that would basically act as a constitution for his entire rule. Okay, so here they are. First, the Book of Allah, the ultimate source, of course. Second, the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him. The practical, real-world example of how to live by that divine law. And third, and this is key, the examples set by the 2 sheikhs before him, Abu Bakr and Umar. This framework created a kind of 3-point checklist for every single decision, making sure it was always anchored in divine law and proven successful practice. But it's one thing to have these big, high-level principles. It's another thing to make them real for your governors and administrators on the ground, right? How do you do that? Well, Uthman came up with a simple but incredibly powerful analogy that they would never, ever forget. Just listen to this. Allah has commanded rulers to be shepherds. He did not command them to be money collectors. I mean, that's one of the most profound statements about governance you'll ever hear. It completely reframes the job of a leader. Your focus isn't on collecting taxes, on extracting wealth. It's on caring for people, guiding them, protecting the flock. It's a total 180, a complete shift from a mindset of power to one of pure responsibility. And you can see here, it's like a fork in the road. It leads to 2 totally different outcomes. On one side, you've got the shepherd, the just ruler. They care for people, give them their rights, and build a society on things like modesty, trust, and honesty. But on the other side, you've got the money collector. They're just focused on grabbing wealth, and what happens? They ignore the people, and it leads to a total collapse of morals, of loyalty. The very fabric of society just starts to unravel. Now, this whole idea of being a shepherd wasn't just some memo he sent to his top officials. No, this was a philosophy for everyone. Let's take a look at how he extended this guidance out to the entire community, from the military commanders all the way out on the frontiers to the regular folks living in the cities. For the military, the message was really straightforward. Stay the course. Nothing fundamental is changing here. The mission continues, and it's guided by the exact same principles as before. This was so important because it prevented any instability and it reassured all the soldiers that their purpose was constant. It wasn't based on the whim of a new guy in charge, but on the solid collective will of the community. And he also had this incredible foresight. He warned about specific things, these innovations or deviations that he saw could pull the entire community, the Ummah, off the right path. He pointed to a few things specifically. First, the kind of spiritual carelessness that can creep in when people get too comfortable with luxury. Second, the challenges that come with really rapid social changes. And third, and this is maybe the most prescient of all, the danger of people reading the Qur'an but without any deep, true understanding. Okay, but this entire system of principled rule,
It all hinges on one absolutely critical idea. The leader is not a king who is above the law. Personal accountability for the leader himself wasn't just a nice idea, it was an essential, non-negotiable part of the whole deal.
And he made it absolutely clear to everyone his authority was not absolute, far from it. He was bound, he was restricted by those same foundational pillars we talked about, the divine law on one hand and the agreed will of the community on the other, a community that had every right to question him. I mean, just let this quote sink in for a second. If you find in the book of Allah that you should put my legs in irons, then put my legs in irons. This is just an astonishing thing for a leader to say. It's the ultimate declaration that he is under the law, not above it. He wasn't just saying he was willing to be held accountable. He was actively commanding the people to enforce the law on him, just like they would on absolutely anybody else. So let's wrap this up by looking at the practical mechanisms that held all of this together. Because these weren't just nice, abstract ideas, right? They were active, working principles that literally shaped the state and cemented this legacy of principled rule.
At the heart of it all was the principle of shoora, which is mutual consultation. This was absolutely central. Uthman set up a formal council, and he was constantly taking matters back to the community and its leaders. This made sure that any big decision that affected the whole ummah was made collectively, together, not just by one person, unilaterally. It was all about reflecting the will of the people he was there to serve.
And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? A question that feels just as relevant today as it was then. You know, in our world, which is so often driven by personal ambition and the hunger for power, what can we learn from a model like this? What happens when we reframe leadership not as some prize you win, but as a heavy trust? A shepherd's duty, where you're fully and completely accountable to a moral and divine compass?